Well, President Biden is sending Congress an urgent request for military aid to support Ukraine and Israel in their respective war efforts. Now, according to multiple reports, the request is expected to be for just around $100 billion, $60 billion going to Ukraine, about $10 billion for Israel, and the rest going to Taiwan and to support the U.S. Mexican border. Now, back here at home, this comes as the House of Representatives are meeting now for a third round of voting for Representative Jim Jordan as House Speaker. Here to help us navigate what is next, we want to bring in Brian Gardner. He's Stifel Chief Washington Policy Strategist. Brian, it's good to see you. Let's start with what we heard from President Biden last night during his address. What was your reaction to the speech, and how effective do you think it was?
Yeah, I question how effective it was. I thought it was a good speech. But I didn't hear any lasting takeaways. So I think the speech has a bit of a short shelf life. A lot of it was on Ukraine, and public support for funding in Ukraine has been slipping for months. Public support, according to a Reuters poll, has lost 12 points since May. And I don't know that the president turned that around last night. So good speech. I think he made a case on Israel pretty well. But I don't know that he connected the dots enough for American voters on Ukraine, especially given the situation on the border. You just mentioned how the funding package has a undetermined amount for funding. But for voters who are very frustrated about inflation and the border, I think there's frustration and anxiety about why the U.S. government is spending billions abroad and seems to be less concerned about domestic politics.
Is this also still or could it become more of a domestic issue, though, if we do see not enough be kind of earmarked for, yes, given that it's a lot of the funding that would go towards the other wars that we're not necessarily involved in, there's still some impacts as well to different commodities that we rely on. So is there still some of that spending that's necessary in order to make sure that the inflation side, and for what Biden has been continuing to tout as Bidenomics, that still makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, the administration is clearly trying to lean into their domestic economic record. I don't know how effective that's been so far. His approval numbers on the economy are weak. Let's be very blunt about it. Despite a pretty good economy, voters, I think, are more frustrated over inflation and the stickiness of inflation than they are over overall economic growth. We see labor unrest and a series of strikes around the country. There's a dissatisfaction and a sense of anxiety, a little bit of despair among some voters. So I think the White House has its work cut out for it in terms of selling this package to Congress, especially the House. I think it'll get a lot more support in the Senate, and it's pretty clear. But House Republicans, especially that populist element, their constituents, I think, are very frustrated. And it's going to be very difficult for the White House to win sufficient House Republican support.
Brian, let's talk a little bit about what exactly is going on with House Republicans right now and the disarray that it seems like we're seeing play out within the GOP party. When it comes to the speaker race, Jim Jordan reiterated once again, at least this morning, that he has no immediate plans to abandon his bid to become speaker. When you take a look at the opposition that seems to be growing within the GOP party for Representative Jim Jordan, how do you see this playing out? Because it almost seems like we're getting further and further away from a potential resolution.
I think we are, Sean. I mean, there was a glimmer of hope over the last day or so that empowering Speaker Pro Tem McHenry could be a way out, and support for that quickly collapsed in both parties. There's insufficient support for giving him more power. As you noted, Mr. Jordan signaled that he's not going to get out. He's not dropping his bid, but his opponents, are signaling very clearly they're not changing their mind either. So there's a real impasse. I think this could go on for several more weeks. I mean, I had originally thought when Speaker McCarthy was deposed that Republicans would kind of figure out a path forward relatively quickly, that it was in their interest to do so. But that was clearly not the case. And at this point, I don't know that there's a clear path forward. There's no viable alternative to the three Republicans who have put their name forward for the speakership, being McCarthy, Scalise, and now Jordan. So I think this goes on a couple more weeks.
Yeah, a swift deposition with a questionable and drawn out race now to fill that position as well here. So when we think about the chances then of how this could also just permeate over into a government shutdown simply because you don't have a speaker, and if we're talking about several more weeks here before a viable alternative emerges, then that puts us right up against the deadline again.
It does. I mean, I do think there is a consensus, a bipartisan consensus, that the government should not be shut down. I think when we get closer to the November 17th deadline of the continuing resolution, even if there's not a speaker, I do think there will be some sort of move to extend the CR. And that could be the way that McHenry gets additional power. If he's still the Speaker pro tem, and they just kind of bulldoze a spending bill through, that could set a precedent for McHenry actually to run the House. Maybe that's the resolution for all of this at the end. But I think that a government shutdown, it is possible, but I don't think it's the likely outcome when we get to mid-November.
I hope you're right there, Brian. We will continue, obviously, to track all the developments coming out of D.C. Brian Gardner, always great to have you. Stifel Chief Washington Policy Strategist. Thanks so much.
Thank you.